everyone. As you can probably tell by my outfit, I am French maid minion Michelle, and I was here last year, and I am back to do a Random Talk Sunday. And I thought it would be interesting for this Random Talk Sunday to address something that I think holds a lot of interesting appeal to people around this time of year. And that is haunted places, or places that have allegedly had some paranormal activity. Now, this is not to, you know, bring out an opinion as to whether or not these paranormal phenomena are real. But what I am trying to bring up is ones that apparently had these kinds of activities supposedly occur. You can interpret them as people just not really saying the truth, for people who've said they've seen things but maybe it was something else, or you can take them as gospel. Either way, that's really not my intention behind this video. My largely, at least the real intention behind this video, is to just give you some of those places and sort of let you kind of just decide for yourself what you think. But these ones have been, I think, rather famous and sort of well known for being supposedly haunted. Starting out with the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania in the United States. This particular jail was made in 1829, and it was really the first of its time that started initiating the whole use of solitary confinement. And in case anybody's really unaware of what really solitary confinement really meant, it really was designed to be, initially they thought it was supposed to be sort of, I guess, it was supposed to be some sort of rehabilitation. And what they would do is basically they would just isolate somebody from the entire world, nobody they could talk to, and it was alleged that some people that were in that jail sort of went insane because of this of being in that solitary confinement. And basically, I guess it wasn't until the 1940s that this particular jail started seeing some strange activity. And this includes unexplained shadowy figures, evil cackling, weird sounds, and even ghostly faces, supposedly. So it's really a place that is known for being something of what we would consider rather bizarre, and also of the spooks, I guess, because it really was a place where really horrible things did occur. And I think oftentimes, whether or not you believe in actual paranormal activity, those things sort of stay with the one place that, sort of had that kind of horror sort of happen. And whether or not these things are supposedly real, it only makes sense that you, I think, would probably even feel that something unusual would occur there, unlike another place that hasn't really faced sort of tragedy or some kind of horror. And it's rather interesting because the facility does look like something that would be, it is kind of the cliche sort of haunted looking, I guess, jail, you could say, because it does look rather old. It does feel very, it just looks like a place where people sort of go to, not be living, so to speak. It really, a lot of it can be, I think, based on just appearance alone, that I think could really frighten and intimidate people. But it seemed to have a fairly extensive history, and it only makes sense that this one would be one of the ones that is rather up there, because after doing some research, I realized that this one in particular was one that kept sort of coming up. So, yeah, if you've ever been to the Eastern State Penitentiary, hopefully you don't get spooked by something, but apparently there have allegedly been some creepy stuff that's occurred there. Second one that I want to mention is actually one that the regular Michelle visited one time. And yeah, I've been doing a little snooping, so but don't judge me. But basically, she did go to this location, the Tower of London, which is nowhere other than London, England. So this one is significantly older than the one within the United States, which only makes sense, considering the United States history is so short compared to the one in Europe. But basically, this particular tower was built in 1078, so really old, by William the Conqueror. And basically, what happened throughout the years of that tower's existence is basically tortures and executions. So it was definitely not a place where happy sunshine rainbows, it wasn't Disneyland. This place. This place was a place where people would basically just go to die, unfortunately. Somewhat similar, maybe you could say, to the kinds of things that probably occurred in the Eastern State Penitentiary, but I think this one has a really, really dark and very disturbing history behind it, especially when you really look at the various amounts of torture and just the sheer brutality that was behind a lot of the killings that occurred there. In particular, they say actually Anne Boleyn's ghost, because in case nobody knows, Anne Boleyn was a wife of Henry VIII, and he was basically her really executioner because he thought that she cheated, so he basically sent her off to die. And basically what they would do back then is they would just execute you through the head. There wasn't a guillotine, so it probably did take some time to get the head off, but that's how they did it back then. And yeah, so basically that's what ended up happening to Anne Boleyn. And it is allegedly said that her body goes around this place, supposedly, or roams around. But just her body, not her head, because her head was cut off. So that's the whole premise behind her figure being there. And there's also a lot of other sightings of various people. But another really famous one is of these two kids. Now, there's these two children who were supposedly, they believe, princes. Unfortunately, back in the day, if your kids were not legitimate, in other words, you did not sleep with the king and committed adultery, basically, and had somebody else's kids, then those kids would unfortunately be sent to be supposedly, I believe in this case, executed. And basically these two kids sort of roam around in like these nightgowns, and they just kind of, I guess they have these very like frightened and scary faces, like when people have come in contact with them, supposedly. So I guess, there probably was some torture that was involved, maybe with their lives or something. So I think it only makes sense if there was actually their ghosts there, they would probably be very frightened and scared, because they would probably have no idea uh, what was really going on, or really understand why they were in the sort of position that they ended up kind of being in. So I think it only makes sense that, in the Tower of London, it's definitely a place of just really just horrible atrocities, and it only makes sense um, that you would see a lot of these sort of supposedly alleged sightings. So it definitely wasn't a pleasant place, and still is museums though still to this day. And although there have not, although I've never seen any ghosts within my lifetime, it I think only makes sense if there were ghosts that they would roam there. Now, this second one is actually really interesting and also really famous. One that the regular Michelle has actually also seen, but it's never actually been in, and that's the White House within the United States. Yes, where the president lives. There's supposedly hauntings where the president lives. And these sightings are numerous. Like, they are just unbelievable. One in particular, Winston Churchill, who stayed at the White House, allegedly saw Abraham Lincoln by the fireplace. Like, he saw him standing there next to the fireplace. And then once he saw that, he never went into that room again, because it freaked him out so unbelievably much. He never went in that room again, allegedly. So an actual person, that's, was really high up in the ranks there, Winston Churchill's a very famous figure, supposedly was haunted by Abraham Lincoln. Which I find to be rather kind of funny in a way. Just kind of like going, what? How did that happen? But apparently, supposedly it did, at least according to Winston Churchill. And there's also been numerous other presidents' sightings, including Teddy Roosevelt. Apparently, Teddy Roosevelt still liked roaming around the White House. Herbert Hoover, Dwight Eisenhower, Jackie Kennedy, even. Some first ladies have been spotted. Also, Abigail Adams. Andrew Jackson also being another one that people have allegedly seen. The interesting thing too is I think in particular within the case of Abigail Adams, I believe they've seen her supposedly put stuff onto because I guess she would do sort of her laundry, so I guess they've seen her actually doing her laundry, supposedly. And basically, a lot of people have said the similar thing with Abraham Lincoln, like they would see him by the fireplace. So for some reason, Abraham Lincoln just likes to show up at the fireplace. And also there have been cold spots, disembodied footsteps, voices, knocks, and screams also. And apparently, I guess Andrew Jackson likes to, I guess, get mad and curse a lot or something. So a lot of really bizarre things apparently have happened in the White House, and a lot of people who've worked in the White House supposedly have sort of seen these kinds of very bizarre, strange occurrences. And I think it only makes sense that those people would see that, considering the fact that they actually legitimately work there and kind of, go throughout the whole facility. It would only make sense that they would have some kind of knack for, I guess, maybe somehow maybe being in touch with these supposed spirits if they actually do exist. But it is definitely a place that's full of history, and I think that's really important too about a lot of these haunted places is they have a lot of people that have came and went there, and the impact is just so heavy, and I think it only makes sense that people would supposedly have some kind of experience maybe there that might have been unusual But it's not to say whether or not paranormal activity is real or not. Second to last one I wanted to mention is the Myrtle Plantation, which is within the United States. And this one actually I thought had an interesting story. Apparently, on this plantation, there was a slave who basically rebelled, and in doing so, killed the plantation owner and his family. And supposedly, she was hanged for her crime. So, back then, you definitely did not kill your master and your master's family. And supposedly now on this plantation, her ghost, as well as the kids that she did kill, apparently, also roam there. So they kind of just frolic everywhere. So that's really what's behind this particular plantation. But I found that to be very fascinating because a lot of these places, they usually don't have certain stories. They don't have particular incidents, so to speak, to where you can really turn to. It's just kind of, a lot of them are like the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Like there's not a whole lot of actual story to really back up the sightings, so to speak. But unlike the other ones that I've mentioned, there is sort of some story, there's some kind of history involved, and some kind of explanation behind the hauntings, so to speak. And this one specifically had a sort of story behind it, and I thought that was rather interesting. And kind of odd too, how she's kind of roaming around with the people that she killed. I don't know how they would be really happy to see her roaming around with them. Yeah, that's really the story behind that particular plantation. And the last one I wanted to mention is actually one that's rather fascinating and is sort of in the middle in between of not something that's too specific and not something that's too general. And that's the Bodie State Historical Park within the United States. And this is in California. And basically, this particular town of Bodie was a gold mining town, so to speak. So around the time of the 1800s, when people were going west to find gold, in particular California, these were the towns that sort of sparked up, and they ended up making a lot of money, and they ended up being fairly prosperous, and then eventually they ended up becoming abandoned. But regardless of its abandonment, it's still supposed to have the ghosts of Bodie basically looking out for that town still. That is really abandoned. And allegedly, if you remove something from that Bodie State Historical Park, there'll be a curse put on you, according to this legend supposedly here. And the curse involves a whole strain of bad luck. So your life will, I guess, suck if you take something that's from them. Which makes sense, because if they are these very sort of territorial ghosts and they feel like that this land and this town that they built is really theirs, it would only make sense that they would put on some kind of supposed curse. But those are really all of the particular haunted places that I wanted to kind of address for this video. I think there's a lot of them out there that are actually really fascinating, and I think you can definitely look these ones up. I'd be more than happy to hear if anybody's actually even visited one of these places, and it's actually sort of, or if you've ever really experienced any kind of paranormal activity, or if you've ever been in a scenario where you felt something unusual kind of happen to you. I mean, I wouldn't say I've ever really have. There just been points where I feel like it just feels eerie because you're in an older spot. But I've never had any kind of paranormal encounter ever. And who's to say if they're actually real or not? I mean, that's definitely still open to, I think, a lot of speculation. But it's still really interesting to read up on this kind of a thing and, really understand kind of even the history behind it. And whether or not it's real, as to whether or not these people are still roaming around, who knows? And maybe it's kind of good that we don't really ultimately know. We have sort of the mystery. And for those people who've actually maybe experienced something, they have that sort of to have for themselves. It's not something that usually a lot of people experience. So, but I think that's really ultimately all I can say for this video. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and hopefully I can come by around next year. Bye-bye.